Hey everybody, this is Perch, and a couple days ago, weeks ago, time has no meaning anymore. We talked about continuity, and I asked the question, is it time to just dump continuity? Actually, a viewer asked that question, I answered it. I still don't think it's necessary. I don't think you have to dump continuity. I think that it just takes a little bit of thoughtful writing, a little bit of care, and continuity can be fine. It can be your friend. The challenge of continuity is that it's when you don't do it right. It's when you decide to just kind of randomly make up things as you go, or you play this game of like, hey, I inserted it, therefore it's canon. And I'm reminded of this, and I for some of you, if you hung out in a comic store in the late '90s, kind of early 2000s, you would get people would say things like, it's canon now, about really silly things. It was kind of a joke, like, oh, it's canon now. And so that's something we would do, but we didn't take that seriously. Like if you had some kind of silly, nonsensical mistake in a comic, it didn't become automatically autocanon and therefore screw up the actual comic. And what I mean by that is today I feel, and you may, by the way, people may roll their eyes and everything else, but I think there's a handful, not a ton, not the majority, but a few, for lack of a better word, bad actors in comics, that they're basically just trying to get little fanfic-like scenes inserted into comics, and then they will call it canon. That's what I think is going on in a lot of cases. And so I think like you get this, that was Chip Zdarsky. He had this little scene where Batman is giving googly eyes to somebody else, and it was clearly that Batman, I think Bruce was manipulating the guy because he was trying to win the contest. It was in Batman's younger years and everything else. But it was written in such a way that if you really stretched, you could say, aha, they're making Batman Bruce bisexual, they're making him gay, whatever. He's gay now. It's canon. And certainly Bleeding Cool ran with it, a bunch of fans ran with it. But the more disturbing part were comic creators, writers who currently work for DC, who would say things like, well, can't stop it now, it's canon. And that's the kind of stuff that I think breaks continuity, when you're being disingenuous about what you're inserting into the character. No pun intended phrasing. But that's where I think there is a lot of stuff that goes on that is along those lines. So this viewer writes mail. It says, hey, Perch, just listen to your video defending continuity. While I get your point, I think you're missing a crucial generational divide in comics, which is responsible for giving continuity a bad rap. If you're reading books in the 70s and 80s as they were released, I think continuity was really working for you. This is where you have cool interplays between characters, runs such as Punisher's early solo books happening at the same time as his rivalry with Daredevil, Spider-Man's alien costume coming from Secret Wars, to amazing and even big crossover reboots like Man of Steel, Crisis, and Infinity Gauntlet. Even stuff like Earth 2 Superman getting married in the 70s is a demonstration of continuity doing good work for comics and helping to produce memorable stories. Man, just reading that, by the way, I'm like, man, those are such good moments. It's sad. And I was a comic reader of the 80s, not the 70s. But, well, maybe the very late side. No, 80s. It'll be early 80s. But, man, what good feelings those memories are, right? I mean, that's a good one. Like Daredevil, Punisher's rivalry of Daredevil, and how it kind of played out in his solo title, and then in other comics is good stuff. Anyway, continuing with the mail. If you're reading currently released books in the 1990s, 2000s, as I was, you come away with a very different impression. Continuity in stories like the Clone Saga, Onslaught, and even later stuff like Infinite Crisis and Civil War is pretty transparently a gimmick designed to sell a bunch of low-quality tie-in books predicated on the promise of a status quo change that lasts a year if you're lucky. DC is especially bad about this stuff. Their universe seems to reboot every 6 months, but Marvel does the same scam over and over and over again with stuff like Dark Reign and the Heroic Age. When companies promise everything is changing and then inevitably reverse course after a few months, you stop believing them. That's very true. By the way, the whole recent, you know what? I can't even remember the name of it. This is how sad it is. The event, Devil's Reign, right? Is that Devil's Reign? Is that really what it was? Devil's Reign? The Kingpin, Daredevil, Kingpin's the mayor, and he makes superheroes illegal or whatever else. I'm sorry, but this storyline is ridiculous. Particularly the fact that we had the Superhero Registration Act. We saw Norman Osborn as national. This happened In comic timeline, roughly like 6 months ago, I don't know the exact, like a year ago, you're telling me that you're expecting us to believe, and the story was fine, but you're expecting us to believe New Yorkers are so stupid as to elect a supervillain that's going to run the state and like trap the old people in nursing homes when they all have COVID? Oh, sorry, wait a minute, wrong thing. No, I'm just saying it is ridiculous, and you are right. By the way, continuity does get a bad rap when it is the gimmick, when it is the we're changing everything in the entire world forever and ever and ever. It's never going to be the same way again. Oh, that was 2 months ago. Well, now they're back to life. The one that always gets me, and it sticks in my mind, was always the a major death that signals a turning point in the entire Marvel universe. And they killed off the Winter Soldier, Bucky, who was the new Captain America, in the pages of Fear itself. And then before the event was over, they brought him back to life, along with Thor, who also died during that. I mean, like Jesus, everybody. It was ridiculous the amount of time, or the lack of time, before they resurrected everything. It's just absurd. I'm sorry. I mean, it was just that was stupid. And as a reader, you do start to feel like nobody is taking you seriously, and it's all a bunch of crap. But anyway, the mail continues. So what's the fix? I'm not sure there is one. It's possible that the high prices, stupid gimmicks, and decades of editorial mismanagement have actually killed American comics, and now we're all just a bunch of kids kicking a dead horse and just wondering why it can't get up and trot. Anyway, my 2 cents. That's a downer of an ending. Christ. Yeah, so look, the comic industry is not a dead horse. All it takes is, and I say this very flippantly, but all it takes is some people writing a good story. All it takes is some writers kind of, like, do you know how miraculous a 6 month run of a comic would be? Chip Zdarsky and Marco Cinchetto did Daredevil, and within 4 months to 6 months, people were like, "Oh my God, it's the rebirth of American comics." That's all it took. I mean, it was not even a year before people were like, "I've given it. Yeah, it's won. This has won the internet. Everything is good." This tells you how absolutely starved comic readers and buyers are right now, where even a mildly passable run, and that's not, by the way, knocking Zdarsky. His Daredevil is perfectly good. There's no complaints. It's fine. I enjoy reading it. I think it's a good comic. I don't think it's the best Daredevil run of all time. I think that honor belongs to several other writers. But it's good. It's entertaining, and I'll take it. I'm happy. But I think comic readers, comic collectors have been so abused that now even just like a brief glimmer of excitement turns the entire world around. We saw this to some extent with Hickman on the X-Men book when he did House of X Powers of 10. It was 12 issues, came out, weekly, right? Or was it every other week? Anyway, the whole thing was done within 3 months. And people lost their minds. It was the absolute best thing to happen to comics in the history of comics. That's how it was. I mean, this was the second coming of Claremont. Hickman has saved Marvel. These were things that people said. Super cynical people said. People who regularly do videos talking about how the entire world is coming to an end and, everything is bad. They basically turned it around and got to, this run, Hickman's run, House of X Powers of 10, it's probably the best comics we've ever had, or at least the best comics we've had in 20 years. My point in this is that there's a really low bar. So I'm sorry I got away from the continuity topic, but you could easily bring comics, quote unquote, back to life, get people excited again, easily. It would not be that hard at all. And all it would take is, a little bit of effort. It would take just a decent, couple issues of good writing, and everything turns around. And that should give us all hope. As for continuity, I think you're onto something. I think if you were reading comics and enjoying them back in the 70s and the 80s, continuity had a lot of really cool things to it. Kind of through the mid-90s, probably was pretty good. And then it started to go to hell. And then we got to where we are now, which is, it's gimmick-driven. And if it's gimmick-driven, you really don't care about continuity because continuity doesn't matter anyway. Which, again, maybe, given some of the dark times we've had in comics, is a good thing. I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for the mail. I appreciate the counterpoint and the wisdom that went on there. Very, very great stuff. And thanks for listening.